Hi, welcome to the Beyond the Bottom Line with Rebecca Olson. I am your host and CEO of the Maryland Association of CPAs. And last month's podcast, we really had a focus on the audit, right? And we talked about the trust and quality and how that really is the core of the CPA profession, what we deliver, right? It's our product, if you would say. And so we also talked about how that product then is shaped by a couple like really key inputs, right? The regulatory environment that we operate in, the technology that we use to deliver that product, and of course, our number one and really, you could argue, only asset, our human capital inside our firms. And so today we're going to zoom in on one of those inputs, the input of technology, which of course is playing an increasingly important role in shaping the profession. And we're going to talk about the way it's changing how we build and steward that product of trust and quality, right? And especially when we think about the client relationship. So I'm really excited to have our friend from 8 a.m. CPACharge, Alfredo Garza here. Alfredo is the enterprise sales director, and he works with accounting firms on modernizing their client experience through technology, of course. He spent the last couple years in the profession really partnering alongside firms as they're navigating this digital transformation. And changing their own client expectations and service delivery. So he brings a great perspective of, not just what is happening inside of one firm or organization, but how he's partnering with firms of varying sizes, and seeing, where some firms are making progress in this area, where some might get hung up or stuck, and what it really takes to move forward. So with that, I want to welcome Alfredo.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you for the intro. And really happy to be here today discussing this. And I want to say, first of all, congratulations on the 20 under 40 CPA practice advisor list that you made it to earlier this month.
Oh, thank you so much.
Really to kind of get it started, you mentioned trust. And really if trust is the product on our end, I think technology as we see it now is like the delivery system for that
Mhm.
trust. So where trust used to always live inside like the end product of the work, right? The audit, the return, maybe the advice that they were giving out. Now there's an experience to that as well. So that experience, that client experience, can either reinforce the trust, right, and make it feel very trustworthy, very professional, or it can actually like undermine it and slightly erode it if that client experience isn't up to par, as maybe the quality of their work for some of these CPA firms is. So giving clients that ability and that client experience will naturally add to the trust kind of there. And I think there's three areas where you really look at trust, and it's trust in the technology from a firm perspective,
Mhm.
trust with the client, right, like we spoke about, and then trust internally within the firm. So you spoke about like the human capital aspect of it. So how do we get that trust? How do we get partners trusting staff and change and things like that going? So really a lot of areas where trust is extremely important to the CPA profession and CPA firms in general.
Absolutely, yeah. And we're gonna like dig a little bit into each of those things, right? With the technology and how we create that digital transformation inside our firms, and outside in that client relationship. And all of that is that change management component, right? How does this look process wise, but then experience wise? I love that you use that term. Before we dig in though, we like to start with some good news. So tell me, what I wanted to get to know what's going right, what's going good, what is Alfredo really excited or encouraged by, personally, professionally, what's going good?
So I'll give you two, personal and a professional side. So personally, this past weekend, my wife and I celebrated our first year anniversary. So that
Oh,
was
congratulations!
very,
That's exciting. Yes.
yeah. Thank you. We're very excited about that, and really just like what's to come. And it's been a great year so far. So like really excited to see us grow in kind of that side. And we had a good sushi dinner for that, so that was
Ooh,
fun.
very nice, very
Um, And on a professional level, I think one of the things I'm noticing this kind of post tax season, since we're kind of out of it now,
Okay. Good.
still feeling somewhat of the post tax season hangover, as some people call it.
Yep.
But I'm seeing firms actually jump to the table and want to start having discussions around technology quicker than I had before in previous years. So
Awesome.
I don't know what's in the air right now, but that is really motivating to see that firms are really understanding that, hey, you know, that they need to look at their tech stacks. They need to look at how they're approaching technology, how they're approaching the client experience, and they want to do that now sooner than later, or you know, having to wait till extension season or anything like that, and then maybe think about it at the beginning of the year. You know, they're wanting to have those conversations now versus later, and that's just really encouraging to see. A lot of these firms want to modernize now their processes.
Absolutely. That's fantastic news, right? Yeah, and it is something it's so rapidly changing. So that proactive, them reaching out kind of thing is really exciting, definitely. So I'm
Yeah.
wondering your work with firms, right? And it varies, the sizes of firms that you work with, of course. How do you see the role of technology really reshaping that client experience, right? And that word experience, and not just the deliverable or the relationship or what, but how that whole experience wraps up together. Where do you see technology really having the biggest impact?
Yeah, I think when we look at like the technology side of it, a lot of the times we think of like efficiencies and you
Mhm.
know how can I remove time, and you're thinking of that really a lot of the times internally. And how do you you know save your staff time internally? How does it make this less touches for us internally, kind of thing? When you have to sometimes think about like the client touch points, right? So how can I make the client experience easier? Which a lot of the times by enabling an easier client experience, maybe through technology, maybe that's portals or adoption of them, you know, making it easier for them to send documents, things like that. But if I make that experience for them easier, it in turn actually makes it easier for the firm. So
Mm.
as much friction as I can remove from like the client's touch point and the client's end experience, that's usually where I can change it. I was listening to this podcast the other day, and I'll bring this up, but it was somebody, I think it was Elon Musk talking to somebody when they were setting up Tesla's website so that you could buy a car online. And I think
Mm.
he went through Domino's Pizza's like online ordering, and he said it takes me 10 clicks or less to order a pizza from Domino's. Make that happen with Tesla. So as you
Um,
think about like how easy the client experience is, if I can buy a car in under 10 clicks on my phone, you know, you want the client experience to be a little bit easier. You want to make that easier for the client to be able to jump in and do what they need to do on their end, whether that's paying or whether that's adding documents and things like that, being able to communicate with you. But you want to make it as easy as possible. And I would say like start easily with it and audit your own. So try to become your own kind of client and see what the client has to go through in that experience. And then is when you start looking at tools, but only until you understand the problem, in all honesty. Don't start with the tools to fix the problem. Understand the problem before you fix the tools.
that's such a great point, and that idea of go through your own customer or client journey, because we are so used to being in the weeds of, like, what the back end looks like, right? That sometimes just by doing that, there's some big ahas, right? Of like, "Wow, this is clunky and, really annoying," or we were looking at starting with the experience or the problem in mind and then looking for the solution. We were looking at this solution, but actually that's not addressing a problem we have. We have this problem. So I love that advice of really kind of being your own test market and making sure that you're providing an experience that you as the firm, as the partner, or the manager, or whatever, would want to experience, right?
Yeah, and I think so I have a slight story to that from a
Yeah.
firm. I won't mention any names, but really this firm is collecting kind of information on their clients and kind of how the process was working for them. And overall they're like sort of like an MPS study
Mhm.
on their end. And really what they were noticing on their end was the clients loved the work and they were very happy with the work that was being done, but they kept complaining about the client experience, about having to mail in documents, having to, several different things of that process that were pretty difficult. They had to mail in checks to a PO box, for example, to pay it and things like that. So this firm basically rolled it out with new kind of client touch points and engagement through online, whether now they can send in documents online, and they weren't necessarily thinking, okay, what's the best solution I can bring out towards this, but just making a step in the right direction. And now a lot of the comments that they're getting are, it adds trust to it. And I think one of the ones that they had shined specifically that I wrote down was, this feels like a real firm now. Somebody put to them. And so it's actually just like the trust when we get back into it, right? Having the client experience that, clients just expect that because their day to day is everywhere they sign into, anything they do has this
Right.
magnificent client experience. And so it adds a layer of trust of saying, okay, if my firm looks this professional, then that helps me kind of add that layer of trust with these clients as well.
Yeah, that's such a great point of, their day-to-day lives. What is their experience with other products and services that they are engaging with, right? Because your competitor in terms of client experience is not the CPA firm down the street. Yes, in a way it is, in that they're offering the same service. But when you think of the experience you want to provide, that it's the Amazon. Like, how easy do they make that? Or that, you said the Domino's pizza. I remember working with a firm, this was several years ago, and hearing that they were actually trying to build like that model in like an app and into their tech stack of being the client being able to track, their pizza in the oven, where you would see so and so is putting the toppings on and this person just put in the oven, and like you could track it, and how they could transform that concept in for a client experience concept. And so I think that's so true to the idea that you aren't competing on necessarily quality and trust. Absolutely fundamental, that's the stakes and the everything you need to have in terms of a quality standpoint, but in terms of experience and client winning, and delighting the customer, delighting the client, like, how do we make that experience just easy, and like the other, service providers or products that they interact with all the time?
Yeah, yeah. I think it's really important to start thinking of that client experience kind of moving forward. And I mean, I've even seen a few firms have people in charge of entire client experience, right? And
Mm.
start looking at like, that's what they do. And it's not just a project in and of itself, but it's an ongoing task, right? So maybe there was a small projects within it, but it's a constantly ongoing task of, we didn't just improve the client experience today. It's, we have to constantly look at how can we improve the client experience moving forward as well.
Right, because it's always shifting, right? And that's the thing, both technology is constantly evolving and, like, at that exponential rate that is overwhelming to try and keep up with, but because of that and because of the amount of different apps and interfaces that our clients and really everyone in society is using, their expectations of you are changing and evolving pretty fast as well. So that's important, keep that experience thing. It's not a one-time project. It's not a ta-da, we did this and we'll put it on the shelf for a couple years. It's a real role within the firm is what you're saying. Right?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And moving forward, I think it's going to be even more and more important, and we'll see it more and more with more firms in
Yeah.
general.
I'm wondering where, like, when I think of, the today's, um, client or up and coming leader, maybe startups, versus some of the more historic leaders, you're more thinking on the, like, personal wealth side that might be, a little adverse to technology. Because I know I've seen clients be that way as well. What does change management look like from a client side? What concerns are clients saying when some of these technology things might be rolled out, and how are we mitigating them? How are we addressing? How are we providing that bridge and helping the person that loves to bring in the, like, grocery bag or legal, box of all of their receipts and stuff, which I know our CPAs don't want, right? Because it's so much easier to have everything, online. Oh, how do you move from one to the other? Like, yeah, in terms of that client relationship.
Yeah, I think getting internally around moving towards that, and then adding kind of a layer of trust internally, and being able to have that change internally is probably the hardest piece to it. And I think you're when it comes into this, you're not just changing the tools. You're sort of changing some of the firm's identity when it comes through it and how it's displayed to clients to a degree, right? You know, you don't lose the full identity of the firm, but a lot of people at firms, especially I would say legacy firms, so not necessarily in the startup space, they've kind of built their careers around these processes as well. So sometimes asking them to change it can have them feeling like it's a question on kind of how they've built things and the value that they've put into place. And so there's sides of that where you have to address that concern from multiple ways. And that could be somebody from the managing partner or partners who have laid out this process, to even maybe some people on the operations side who have been there for 10, 12 years and they've laid out sort of these processes, right? So a lot of the times when you talk to technology, and I think especially me on the sales side, some technology companies tend to think, okay, we're going to save you all this time, so it's all this capacity savings in what we call human capital, right? So like actually being able to save you salaries and things like that. But I think what we have to look at that is kind of in another lens. So not necessarily say, hey, if we add this technology, we'll eliminate these roles. Is what is adding this technology really going to do? Well, for example, there's one firm that I had worked with, and they had implemented it, and they had somebody in their operations team who had been there for about 12 years. And so they really managed everything when it came to billing and the ins and outs of billing at the firm, invoicing and things like that. But a lot of their day was spent doing sort of like manual or tasks that weren't necessarily value add to it.
Right.
So the way that the hardest piece was getting that one person to actually buy into this and see that this was actually going to add value, because I think that person was inherently seeing as like a risk to their role as
Right.
well. But we couldn't have rolled out the actual automation piece without her input and without
Right.
her actually adding value to say, okay, no, this is going to break this way if we do it this way. Because she's the person who knew exactly how the firm operated, how the firm worked. So we kind of changed her from somebody who was doing a task and seen as somebody who would do a task to somebody who leads this internally, right? So like helping, I would say, also her kind of realize like you're able to step up here a little bit more and kind of manage it more and help us really set this up for the future, versus thinking of it as like, hey, this is a risk to what I do today. But it allows you to set yourself up and grow kind of with that firm, and a little bit more of like you get to see things from a little bit further up, right? Versus actually being the day to day in the weeds and adding transactions in and manually posting things and all that kind of fun stuff that people love to do.
Yeah.
And getting away from that and seeing and understanding, okay, we're going to automate a lot of these pieces. Where can this break, for example, and where can you help us out in that piece so that we can make it as easy as possible for you in this role moving forward.
Right. So it's this augmenting of that role using technology, what technology does best, and allowing that person to kind of, be more of a leader of it, right? And then the internal change management, it's such a crucial part of any shift or technology adoption, whatever you're trying to do. I think people discount that part, and um, just the complexities of that, right? When especially as we talk about technology, and I think there's a lot of fear out there, and if you read the news and see what's going on in different organizations and companies. I think I just saw, Meta, like, laying off 10% of their workforce because of AI strategy or something like that. You have this real legitimate fear in a way of technology. So, how you get ahead of that with people, and you said, you involved that person in this process. It wasn't a top down, we bought this new technology, here it is. It was like, okay, how can you help us implement this? Where do you see the gaps, the risk points, the break points, as you mentioned them? Where are you seeing? Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I will say that that was the intention originally. There was a top down buy decision, so like they wanted to implement top down, and I put some brakes on that, and I said, well, let me talk to the people who are actually going to get affected by this work, because even if you buy in, you sign this agreement, it's not going to get implemented well, and it's not going to work well if we don't have the
Right,
conversation with the people who are actually going to get affected by this work, and get their buy-in. So get them to understand why this is of value to them, and this shouldn't necessarily be scary or anything like that, and give them an open voice, right? So like at the end of the day, they do as much of the work as anybody else, if not more sometimes, and so we need to really elevate them and hear their voice, at the end. And it all goes into the experience there, whether it's client or internal as well.
right, yeah, and I do think you mentioned earlier that the internal part, and how important that is, because that gets reflected to clients whether you want it to or not, right? Unhappy people, people that are frustrated by the technology, the client goes to use it, and there's, something that the client ends up seeing that. You certainly don't want that. You want your house to be in order before you have anybody come visit, right? So, what have you seen be really successful in firms in terms of, like, a change management, approach, right? You mentioned actually going and using the team members that are most affected. But what about the people that own those relationships? Do you see sometimes, successes in how to get buy-in across the partners, right, that manage those relationships? How do you work across those kind of sometimes big organizations with lots of stakeholders, to really all kind of come to one decision together?
Yeah, I think when you start talking to partners and you want to get their buy-in, when it comes to some of this, there's really like there's three things that partners are inherently focused on. So when you talk about the relationships and client relationships in that case, like it really boils down to risk in that side. So they want to make sure that they're mitigating against that risk. They've managed these clients in this fashion for so long, and the one, they don't want to lose them, and they don't want to start changing things up for those clients. But inherently, sometimes you have to be able to see that from the other lens, right? Not changing things also adds a risk, and it erodes
Right,
some of that client trust as well, because that client might be thinking, this is my firm is not modernizing, they're not up to date, they're not those kinds of things. And just having some of that, improved client experience, or a more kind of tech forward client experience as we see today, which is turning into sort of the standard,
mhm,
really, when it comes into that. Um, it adds that level of trust with some of these firms, and it could, like I said at the very beginning, it could definitely erode it. But you really want to look at the risk, and then another piece of that, really, when it boils down to risk, is like the realization aspect of it, right? So dollars and cents, right? And what's the collection looking at? How fast is this improving time? So you really want to benchmark things. So when you look at technology and you're implementing it, and you maybe start thinking of, okay, this is the exact piece that I want to, maybe it's document collection, for example, that you're looking at, or maybe it's payments that you're looking at, automating. So like that specific piece, how can I make that workflow specifically easier internally and externally as well
right.
for the client, and going through that one by one. And then that will naturally help with you have to track the KPIs really around it, right? So how fast, if it's payments, how fast am I getting paid today versus, implementing this, and how fast am I getting paid later on? For example, or even in document collection, how many emails do I have to send to chase out documents versus, how easy is it for them to upload it? How fast am I getting my documents in now? And things like that. So getting a good idea before you really go out there and start trying to fix things,
Mhm.
what is going on. But I also don't want that to detract from the fact that sometimes you just have to get started
Right.
with things, right? So you could analyze all these things, get all your KPIs together, but sometimes you just know that a process is broken and just try to move in a direction, and you'll naturally see some of it improve. Um, and the third piece to that is the retention piece, right? If it's very difficult either internally for certain processes, for example, there's a lot of manual work that goes into it. There's a lot of work hours that are going into it. At the end of the day, you're kind of risking your talent,
Mm.
by not giving them the tools to be able to do things efficiently. And you're not setting yourself up for, if there's ever transitions in talent and things like that for the future, within that case, if you don't have the technology kind of infrastructure in that place for somebody to be able to kind of step in, when it comes to that. And then the retention of clients. So I'll go back to the risk side and actually having, modern processes would definitely help. I personally left my CPA for another one because she didn't want to use like online portals. She didn't want to get paid online. It was all PO box and send her checks and things like that, which was fine for a while. And I kind of decided that it just didn't work for me as a person. And
Right.
she might have her client demographic that really works for her, but I think at the end of the day, you start thinking of more modern and people and things like that and what they're going through and what their day to day looks like. You talked about Amazon earlier, and there's a million examples like that where you log into your banks, you go even through Instagram or whatever it may be, and everything's so seamless and easy to use, where that's kind of what people are expecting, as a bare minimum standard in almost everything in their across their life.
Absolutely, yeah. So there's a real, risk. A lot of times we look at, like, the return on investment of a new process improvement or technology implementation in terms of, what will change, what savings will we have by implementing this, but I think another way that what you're saying is there's a risk of not investing in changing, right? And it's, relevancy. If we get down to it, right? It's relevancy to the new generation, right, that has grown up in this more tech forward, easy, seamless experience. And it's about how are you preparing the firm for the future, right? You mentioned the person that you ended up, leaving and, maybe that again, maybe that works for her current client base, right? And so but maybe she's just expecting to wind down at some point, but not looking to build something for the future. But a lot of times those people that are looking to wind down are looking to sell the practice, and it needs to be worth something at that point too. So having that relevancy, continue to be that modern firm, I think is really what it takes right now. And it's hard shifts both internally and externally, but it's the things that will move, and continue the firm to be profitable, to be attracted to clients, attracted to next generation talent. All of those things make these shifts worth doing, even if they're messy and hard, in the process, right?
And I want to say that like with some of this, you really want to celebrate or like really make public internally at the firm, like some of the wins. So I don't know, it might not be the most exciting thing in the world to have automated kind of your client, document collection and things like that. But like maybe the first 10 clients you get to use it, or you saw how much faster it was. You announce that to the firm, let everybody know that, hey, we're collecting documents 10 days faster or something like that. We're getting paid so many days faster now because clients are going in there and being able to pay. So like, it's not the most exciting thing to tell everybody, hey, we're going to fix the client experience. But once you go through and you actually show them the results of it, then they actually say, okay, wow, that is a actually huge increase. Or they don't even know sometimes what the bar is set at currently and what that
Right.
improvement really should look like on that end. So, and the small teams who take charge in some of those changes, everybody appreciates a kudos every now and then. And so it keeps everybody motivated, and it keeps other people internally motivated to jump on other projects and things like that when everybody's getting called out and they're getting their kudos on their end as well.
Absolutely.
So that's just
Yeah.
a culture thing in general, but I think
Yeah.
it really helps with a lot of these smaller projects that people task as less important, but I think at the end of the day, they're hugely important to the continuity and the future of the firm, like you said, Rebecca.
Yeah, I love that emphasis on celebrating because we, I think as a society are so good at moving the goalpost once we get there. Like we don't do the touchdown dance and celebrate for a second and then see what's next and keep on moving forward. I think as CPAs we are strategizing and looking for growth and all these things that we move the goalpost, and we should be thinking of what's next and how we evolve and how we continue to change. But for that talent management, for that change management, for to build the muscles to endure some of the you know challenges of change, to take a second and celebrate. Absolutely, I love that, and show them the real results of the work that they're doing and the impact really that's having. So, one quick kind of at the end, what would you say to, firms or leaders that are looking or to do something like this that know they need to be evolving, know that they want to do this for their clients and their future clients and their current talent, um, but they feel overwhelmed, right? Because they just got done, a busy tax season. It seems like they just need to have a break, and it's constant, right? Regulatory, technology, all of these things impacting them. Where's the good news? Encourage that next managing partner or whatever that says, I think I want to check this out. I want to improve our client experience. What's the good news bottom line for them?
Yeah, I think when you look at everything and when you feel like you need to evolve and all of it feels very overwhelming, like you just said, the good news is you don't need an entire transformation. And I try to touch on this kind of throughout, but you need a like one sequence. So pick one workflow, one sequence, and that one touch point that you feel like is probably the worst piece of your client engagement right now. Try to fix that. So try to build that muscle. And the bar isn't perfection. So like I have to get this 110%. I have to get it right the first time kind of thing. I think the bar literally is movement in this case.
Right,
A lot of the profession has been uh a little backwards on some things compared to the rest of society, and we talk about Amazon and all this other stuff.
right.
So movement in the right direction is still good movement. So feel good about just being able to say, okay, I'm just going to do this and I'm going to try to go after it, and I'm going to try to improve it just little by little, piece by piece. And then as you do things, you'll have iterations and things like that, but you'll never get the first time right. So just assume that, and assume that you just need to kind of get started with some of these pieces.
Yeah, I love that. Start small, find the biggest pain point, start to address it, and recognize that this isn't something. I know as a CPA and as somebody that has grown up, the quality, the checkpoint, like we want to make sure everything is perfect, right? Like that's a lot of our personalities, and recognizing that this isn't something that works that way, right? It's a little fuzzy, especially when you're verse rolling out things. So having that tolerance, recognizing those small wins, and making progress towards that end goal. So Awesome. Thank you so much, Alfredo, for talking with me, for talking about some of these changes that are coming to our profession, how we can kind of tackle them, how we can manage change management, and really start to modernize our firms and the profession in the process. So it was wonderful to see you, and we look forward to talking to you again. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thank you, Rebecca.